lot of times, investors will look at a company and say how it moves on a hockey stick curve, right? So slow growth along the blade of the hockey stick, you hit that inflection point and you could start going up. I think that's where Maine and its innovation economy really is right now.
That's Jake Ward talking about investments, technology, business growth, and development, and the dynamic place that the Maine economy finds itself as the year 2023 unfolds. As the Vice President for Innovation and Economic Development at UMaine, Jake has spent more than 3 decades working with companies big and small to develop products or cutting-edge technology, get advice from researchers and experts at UMaine, and solve many kinds of problems, all in an effort to help start and grow those businesses and the workforce. I'm Ron Lisnett, and this is the Maine Question podcast. As we kick off Season 8, we take a dive into the past and future of the Maine economy. It's always been rooted in the abundant natural resources found here. The forests, waters, and farms still form the backbone of that economy today. However, many of those resources are sort of getting a high-tech makeover. Waste wood and sawdust are being broken down on the nanometer scale, that is 1/1000th of a meter. Those tiny bits can be made into fuel, medicines, and countless other useful chemicals that scientists are just starting to understand. Artificial intelligence is rolling out. Manufacturing is going high-tech. Research on printing 3D houses with bio-based materials is well underway. Maine's also the home of some exciting new alternative energy projects. Helping to accelerate and expand those efforts is the SPIRE office. We do love our acronyms around here, and this one is a mouthful. SPIRE stands for Strategic Partnerships, Innovation, Resources, and Engagement. The mission for Jake Ward and his Associate Vice President Renee Kelly is to connect the resources at UMaine with companies and others who can tap into those faculty experts, or maybe they need a lab or pilot plant to test new products. Perhaps they're having a problem with invasive pests or chemicals like PFAS. SPIRE helps solve those problems and get young companies off the ground, or in many cases, help existing companies and the workforce grow. In episode 1 of Season 8 of the Maine Question podcast, we talk with Jake Ward and Renee Kelly and ask the question, what does the future look like for the Maine economy? Thank you both for taking the time. I think a lot of folks are interested in the topics that you guys deal in every day, so that should make for an engaging, interesting conversation. But maybe let's sort of pull back and try to get the big picture here. The Maine economy, I mean, it's safe to say Intel's not going to open a $10 billion factory in Maine, or Tesla's not going to have an auto manufacturing plant, but there's a lot going on, besides those big projects that you see elsewhere. So talk about that, the 30,000-foot view of the Maine economy. Strengths, weaknesses, misconceptions. How would you characterize it? You've been looking at this a long time.
I think the fundamental strength of Maine and Maine's economy date back to when Europeans first came over and settled Maine. We have always been a natural resource-based state. And what's been pretty incredible, and Renee knows a lot more detail in her review of invention and innovation over the history of Maine, is that we're a birthplace of so many inventions and technologies that have helped benefit from the natural resources, so fishing, farming, forestry, and continue to see those as major parts of our economy, as different, very similar to many other natural resource-based states, but more and more, the nation and the world is looking back at natural resources as the fundamental building blocks of everything.
So coming full circle in a way.
Coming full circle, absolutely.
Yeah. And I would build on that and say, what the world is really looking for now are alternatives to fossil fuel, less expensive energy, clean sources of food, and those depend on our natural resources. So we've been doing research at the university, for instance, on turning trees into all sorts of products that would replace fossil fuels in packaging and building products and all sorts of applications. Maine has the opportunity to help solve the world's problems.
Small companies and startups, those are sort of the bread and butter of the Maine economy. Can you talk about that ecosystem and the feeling of entrepreneurship that is seen throughout the state?
Yeah, well, obviously we are a small business state. And 95% or so of the companies in Maine are classified as small businesses. And that ranges from the individual working out of their home to what in Maine we might consider some of the larger businesses in the state, ones that have a couple of hundred employees. But I think one of the things that has really grown over the last 20 years is among those small businesses focus on innovation and doing new things. When I first joined the office and started working with Jake, and we were working on trying to turn some of the innovations that happen here at UMaine into new economic opportunities for the state. One of the things that we found is we didn't have a strong base of mentors or people who'd been there, done that. Like, if you go to Boston and you ride the T, you can find someone who started a company before, probably just by talking to the people who are in the subway car. So what's really happened over the last 20 years is a build of the culture to support small businesses innovating in Maine, and that's going to serve us well for our future growth.
It's a different way of getting it done as opposed to those big ticket factories that we talked about. Instead of a couple of home runs, it's a lot of singles and doubles, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that we have some very remarkable larger companies, strong companies that are still fundamental. I think, you need the large, you need the small, you need the in-between, and that creates the ecosystem. And important of all that is, if you want financial institutions, banks, and you want insurance companies and all the things that support companies, a lot of them are here because we have some larger companies. And that means that there's, other services, consulting services, lawyers, all that stuff. So you have a robust ecosystem that smaller companies and startup companies can take advantage of. People have commented on our pulp and paper industry over the years, right? 1900, it was the largest, Great Northern was the largest paper company in the world. A largest paper factory in the world. Certainly not now. There's nothing there, but there's a robust paper industry still and expanding around green products and new markets and the way we've changed from digital, from printed and all that. And so, the legacy is still there, and those companies the larger companies like IDEX and WEX still provide an important part to this ecosystem that provides the ability for smaller companies and startup companies to thrive, the whole supply chain.
Right. So we love our acronyms in higher education. So the latest one we have is SPIRE. Mm-hmm. Tell us about SPIRE. What is its mission? Why was it created? What's new about it, if anything? Or is it just a sort of an iteration, the latest iteration?
Well, I'll maybe talk a little bit about the why SPIRE, and Jake can fill in the blanks on what's changed. But one of the things that we've found over the last several years, most recently we've been the Office of Innovation and Economic Development. And over the last several years, while we've always facilitated partnerships between nonprofits, businesses, government agencies, and the university, strategic partnerships were really where we were spending a lot of our time in order to enable innovation and talent development to happen. So the name change to SPIRE is in part to put strategic partnerships at the forefront and as part of the mission of the university.
And SPIRE, spell that out for us. What does it stand for?
Strategic Partnerships, Innovation, Resources, and Engagement.
Rolls right off the tongue, right?
Just as easy as anything.
Yeah. The website talks about 3 major initiatives. Can you give us maybe some examples? One is serving as the R&D lab for Maine businesses and companies.
Yeah, certainly. One of our, as I would call the modern age of R&D in the state, started in the late 1990s, and it's when the state began investing in not only the university R&D, but things like the Maine Technology Institute for Companies and some of the other programs. So the modern age of R&D is when the university decided to be a little more aggressive about growing its R&D and really thinking thoughtfully about building facilities, and I would say modeled on some of our pulp and paper and other of labs that have capacity and real size stuff, right? So if you look at our different facilities, they're pilot plant scale, they're commercial equipment, they're things that are would be representative to a company of what they would have in their own if they were going to do it. So by building that capacity, we can now offer that to companies and be able to do the R&D that they may not have the in-house capacity to do. And similar in that with not having many large companies that have their own R&D and innovation departments, that the access to our talent, our infrastructure, our innovation means that R&D can happen here, like many other companies and large companies in Silicon Valley might do in their own spaces.
Right. I want to circle back to the facilities here in a second, but another key initiative that you talk about is sort of what you alluded to, commercializing products or technologies, taking it from the benchtop to something you can sell and make a profit from, right? That's another key function. Key function,
absolutely. That's and talking about being R&D labs for us or for our companies is the ability to do what we would call fail fast, fail cheap, but rapid cycles of innovation, being able to take it all the way to a product that you can put on the market. So whether we do it with our own stuff, innovations coming out of our federal research, or in partnership with a company, supporting a company who's trying to accelerate their development, absolutely.
And a lot of these companies wouldn't be able to do this development were it not for these resources.
That's it, exactly.
And then the other piece, the third piece, is workforce and community development. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so obviously one of the biggest challenges in Maine right now, given the demographics of our state, is workforce. Companies are struggling to find employees, and they're being more thoughtful about how they build a pipeline of potential employees. So we work very closely with companies as well as state partners to think about how to build that talent pipeline and help connect with the relevant people at the university to either align programs or build programs that can support those workforce development needs. And then going back to the innovation and economic development, also ensuring that we have healthy communities and communities that are sort of ready to receive the talent and the innovation that we're helping to generate here at the university.
So major investments, you talked about in the late 90s, a concerted effort was made, but major investments have been made in the research capacity, labs and such. I imagine when you take people on tours here, they're sort of taken aback sometimes by how much is here and that they didn't know about. But can you walk us through some of the major facilities that these companies or others are accessing and what it's doing for them?
Yeah, certainly. And, if we looked at it from a historical perspective, what was in the early 90s, late 90s, our pulp and paper process development center, our laboratory for surface science, now the first lab, which is semiconductor type fab and all that type of things. Our food and food pilot plant allows for production of food product development, testing, consumer kitchen. We swing over to some of our aquaculture resources, whether they're located on campus or off campus. Big tank systems that allow us to grow aquaculture species in a recirculating systems and things like that. The Advanced Manufacturing Center, which is a super cool product development, prototyping with every kind of machine tool, additive manufacturing, robotics that you can think of, 3D printing in metal. And then I'll sort of wind around to the Advanced Structures and Composite Center, which is now 100,000 square feet of facilities for large-scale testing of structures, composites, things like wind blades, bridges, buildings, our wave tank that allows us to test our floating offshore structures and boats and things like that. So, we have the full circle of everything there. Also, we have our IMRC, which is intermedia. It's sort of the virtual reality lab. Our VEMI lab gets into those types of things. So there's a lot of things that have big shiny things, right? So we show off the big shiny things because that's what people like. But embedded in every other building is a lab or a facility that's where fundamental research is being done, students engaged at the bench, at the lab. So we can go from the wicked small to the wicked big, right? Nano to macro.
That sounds like a marketing slogan right there. And in addition to the facilities and the labs and such, there's the people, of course. There's the researchers and the faculty. Can you talk about, connecting companies with them or faculty and researchers starting their own company? That both things happen, right?
So we like to refer to the sort of the assets as our talent, faculty, staff, and students. our innovation, the ideas that they can come up with, the infrastructure, the labs you just mentioned, and investment is, whether it's state or federal dollars, resources, private sector dollars. So the magic is really in the talent, right? I mean, it's what we as people think, how we think, and how we can connect people, sometimes creating environments where unintentional collisions happen, right? So meetup spaces, things like that, where we bring people together around an organizational meeting or a topic, a sector. So how do we get companies and faculty and staff and students talking to each other to get to those points? Very often we're bumping into companies throughout the state, throughout the country at conferences and workshops. Sometimes they see a publication, sometimes they see a news story, and that gets the juices flowing and that gets it. So getting them together and actually starting to think about, and I can't tell you the number of times we brought a company in who had a very specific problem they wanted to solve. And by the time we've talked through it, we've got them, we're totally down a different pathway. And so constantly talking, it's really the creative mindset that brings people together.
You got to be agile, that's for sure. So can you talk about the mix of companies? You talked about the legacy industries, the farming, fishing, forestry. Those are still traditional strengths, I would imagine. But then there's totally new and emerging sectors, AI or some other high-tech technologies that are out there. So what's sort of the mix that we're seeing in Maine right now?
Well, the state has, when it started making those investments that Jake referred to, it targeted 7 technology sectors. So it includes those traditional industries that you just mentioned, but it also includes biotechnology, information technology, environmental technologies, as maybe some of the newer emerging industries in Maine. And I think what's really kind of neat, I think, is that we're now seeing sort of the cross-pollination of those things. So, for instance, I mentioned, we have technologies that we've developed at UMaine using wood material that are now being incorporated into biotechnology devices, or applying artificial intelligence to forestry and mapping, right? So the magic really comes when, I think, those intersections happen, and those create real opportunities for Maine that might not happen in some other places around the world.
This just sort of occurred to me, too, that, traditionally for many economic development initiatives, Maine was sort of at the end of the pipeline, geographically and in other ways. But with some of the technologies you're talking about, we're moving to the front of the line. It's 180 degrees in some ways, right?
Especially in the areas like the biomaterials, bio-based materials, nanomaterials, as we start looking at how to convert wood into its constituent properties and look at using it as a building block to replace petroleum-based. As Renee said, there's some biomedical, but also reinforcements into bio-based plastic that lead to the first 3D printed home. Some of the stuff that's being used in, we're actually using it as a carrier to put vaccines in fish. So there's just a tremendous, you can do just about anything with it. You put your mind to it, using cellulose nanofibrils or CNF or nanocellulose as we call it. So there's just and we are right now, we're the world's leader in the production of that material and making it available for research applications. So we're sending samples all over the world, all over the country, as new people, new companies are looking at how to use that material. For Maine, it's an opportunity to take some of our lower grade waste residual wood and turn it into a feedstock that can support just a tremendous amount of opportunity. To some extent, we're still on the ground floor of a lot of that, but things are happening fast.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is totally in its infancy. And just so everybody knows what we're talking about, nano, as I recall, is a billionth of a meter.
10 to the negative 9th.
10 to the negative 9th. So you're breaking down a tree into bits that are that small, and because of that, they have these properties that we are just beginning to, at the first base of trying to realize what's possible with them.
That's it. And there's a lot of phenomenons of cellulose, and it's not just trees, right? Any kind of cellulosic material can be broken down into these cellulosic fibers. But we're really just starting to understand, and still don't understand, all the biological, physical properties that are when you put these things together. And so they tend to not be biologically reactive, so things don't grow on them. So you think about infection and contamination and things like that. There's resistance to all that. So if you are going to use it in biomedical applications or surface applications, but people still just don't really understand the true mechanism there. As we start looking at reinforcements, when you're at that scale, the fibers are as strong as steel. And so we now have some composites of these and other materials where we're getting the same performance of steel or carbon fiber or things like that. So really trying to understand the fundamental drives the application. At the same time, a little goes a long way. A little bit added, it really can improve the strength of things, from everything from packaging and paper to composites to just about anything. So really incredible. We have an annual summit every year, and should be here next summer when that goes on, because it's just mind-blowing what people are trying with this. And the best thing about it is they are, they grow naturally. They can be recycled. They can be composted. They sequester carbon when they're not going back out to the atmosphere. As far as looking at the future of our environment, they check all the boxes.
So when you're raking your yard or cutting the grass or picking up, getting logs out of the woods, that's a laboratory. There's all kinds of stuff in that.
Every one of those little fibers built those trees, built those leaves, built those grass. And when you pick it up and look at it and say what that does in the environment, don't you wish you had something that you could build that would be as robust as that?
Absolutely. So everybody knows about the research centers in the country, the Research Triangle in North Carolina, Silicon Valley, or Austin, Texas. Does Maine have the potential to have that kind of thing going on here with something like nanocellulose or other technologies or other businesses?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest about, when you look at those environments, there's will Maine ever be a Silicon Valley? I don't know if we want to be a Silicon Valley. I don't think we can be a Silicon Valley. The concentration of people, the volume, right? So there is some sort of natural occurrence of entrepreneurial, innovative, and how many people per 100,000, right? So, if you've got 5 or 6 million in Boston at lunchtime, then you've got 500 entrepreneurs, right? Well, we don't have 5 million people in the whole state, right? So there is something that has to do with volume and the aggregation of those, and the aggregation of the research institution, not a single institution, the aggregation of the venture capital. A lot of that Research Triangle and those started decades and decades ago. So would that model replicate anywhere today? Hard to say, because the world has changed so much. The thing that's great about the internet and everything is that you don't need to be there anymore, because even if you're here, you're connected to all that. And I think one of the things that we've seen a little bit change from during the pandemic is the investment dollars that used to drag you there, right? So if you had an innovation, they wanted you to be in those centers, are now saying, no, you can stay where you are. We're okay investing with you because we have our touch, we have our reach, we can do that. So I think what we're going to see over the next few decades, I think we're already seeing it, is the distribution of innovative companies are going to be further around. So do we create an environment for the kinds of companies that want to be here, that should be here, that can be here, and will we see the growth in that? We're already seeing that, right? So will it ever get to the scale of a Research Triangle? I think that's,
it's apples and oranges.
My great-grandkids are going to figure that one out. But
right.
But in the environment today, what we really are seeing is, as Renee said, the companies that have been there and done that, so they can mentor that. If your great-grandfather was a shipbuilder, then you knew how to build ships, and your kids knew how to build ships. But if your great-grandfather was an entrepreneur, right? So how do you learn from the generations ahead of time? And now we're starting to see that those people being here, being able to nurture and help grow the next generation.
And for the people who love Maine, you can be here and you can have your
you
cake and eat it too, right?
You can be anywhere. Yep.
Right. Yeah. So talk about SPIRE and the assistance it can provide to companies that are dealing with issues that they have no expertise in. rising sea levels, PFAS, changing crop ranges, pests, what have you. That's another function of what's going on here.
Yeah, certainly we help connect companies to the expertise that can help solve some of those problems. And if we don't have it in-house, we will try to connect them to the right resource outside of the university. And in some cases, it might be appropriate for a student course to work on a problem. So we try to, assess what their needs are, understand the timeliness of the project that they have, and match it up with the appropriate resource, which might be a wide variety of things.
Now, we talked about student entrepreneurship in a previous podcast, and had a student who was starting a company be involved in that episode. Can you talk about that whole aspect of things, and in general, how do these startups fit into the overall picture? I mean, start young, right? I mean, and who knows where you're going to end up, right?
That's absolutely correct. So as we had some of the challenges early on in trying to transition research out of the university, one of the things that we identified was that experience base and culture wasn't there yet to support it, and it's grown tremendously since then. And one of the ways we wanted to address that was to get them while they're young and get them thinking about opportunities to innovate and start companies and have those aspirations as well. So supporting student entrepreneurs is a key part of building that culture and creating opportunities for the state. And I think by getting them young, we are often more likely to root them here in Maine. I often tell students that they can go be a small fish in Boston or elsewhere, but in Maine, people are here to help. There are resources available, and they can potentially make a lot more progress.
Any idea how many startups have come from student projects? Rough guess?
Off the top of my head, I would say we've had hundreds of students come through with business ideas. Those that have carried them forward after graduation, probably 30 or 40 companies, and really diverse ones as well. And some of those end up being smaller individual, small business opportunities, and other students are taking things and building things that they anticipate will be global products.
Right. Wow. Jake, how long have you been at this work? You're a young man, I know, but...
32 and a half years.
32 and a half years. So you have, as much of a unique perspective as anybody. Based on that history and your knowledge, take us out 5-10 years. What do you think we'll see? What are some of the major developments or trends we might be looking for here?
Yeah, so a lot of times, investors will look at a company and say how it moves on a hockey stick curve, right? So slow growth along the blade of the hockey stick, you hit that inflection point and you start going up. I think that's where Maine and its innovation economy really is right now. We're pretty much have been on this slow, steady growth over the last couple decades. And of course, the economy goes up and down during those periods. So we've had some pretty interesting times where the 2008 recession, we saw a big slowdown, and we started to get going again. And then COVID came, we've seen a slowdown. So I think now the path is pretty interesting right now with the way the world is developing, the way markets, the way consumers are. And I think we're pretty close to being on that inflection point where our innovation-based economy is going to start, taking off much quicker. Things in the pipeline, the way the attitudes, just the buzz, the feel is that we're going to be seeing a lot more, success breeding success. So,
any prognostications you'd care to share?
I think
she better not disagree with me.
No, I was just going to say I think Jake is right. I mean, I think it's a combination both of the culture and resources, the environment that we have been building in Maine, and by we I mean obviously us, but also our many partners across the state building this environment, but then also the market opportunity and the removal of some barriers anyway to that growth. So, the fact that, as Jake said, investors are more willing to invest in things that are farther away. But then again, going back to that market opportunity, our natural resources are an incredible asset that most other places don't have
Right.
anymore,
Right.
and we do. So we have the opportunity to leverage those to meet the demands of consumers going forward.
And I just, because I was going to say, I think you said it right there. The consumer is really embracing and demanding, the greener, the cleaner, and I don't think that's just a fad. And I think, the transformation from a petroleum-based economy has to happen. There's just no choice for all sorts of reasons, and some people will. I mean, there'll be things that will be the last things to go, and there'll be things that are the first things to go. And I think, just where we're seeing, even if you just look at the automotive industry and people saying we're going to have 100% electric cars by 2030 or 2035. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have said that. 5 years ago, you wouldn't have said that. So that bolsters so many other aspects of that as you start to, look at those supply chains and start getting to the attitude of electrification and all that. And obviously, some of the challenges of that renewable energy source, having more electricity, drives that side of it. And, battery storage and battery technology drives that side of it. So you're seeing that reformation of a lot of things right now, maybe akin to, the advances of petroleum, post-World War II into post-World War I into World War II, or maybe the beginning of the IT economy in the, the 70s and 80s.
2 phones, wow.
He forgot airplane.
Or that blasted cell phone economy that started with the iPhone, right? Which is, changed the world for a lot of people on a daily basis.
Now, it strikes me that both of you need to know a decent amount of information about a lot of topics. Is that fair to say? I mean, you can't do.
We keep our eyes and ears open to everything.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
We're curious generalists.
Okay. I like that. That's pretty good. Well, exciting times. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks as always for checking us out. You can find all our episodes on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, UMaine's YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook pages, as well as Amazon and Audible. Send us a note with a question or comment if you have any. Maine Question at maine.edu. This is Ron Lisnett. We'll catch you next time on the Maine Question.